Okay, so I'm just going to give you some tips on how to now use your gridded photograph as a guide to drawing up your still life on your canvas. So you should have your numbered photograph, or rather numbered photocopy, numbered and lettered, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E, and you should have done the same to your canvas. I've numbered those and I've put letters up the top, which you probably can't see, but they're there. Now, I've drawn my lemon in just to show you what it looks like. So my lemon sits on the 3-4 line, okay, 3-4, but it also starts about, I'd say, a quarter of the way on that line. So I've started at a quarter. So a little bit of maths here, a little bit of proportion, so a quarter, and it ends exactly here, okay? Ends exactly on that crossbar, and I've done that here, so I've ended it there. And then I sort of work out the height as well. So this is where you just need to use your sort of artistic eye. So this lemon's about a fifth of this height. Again, the fifth down the bottom, and I've just drawn some lines and then I've kind of drawn the lemon in. I'm going to show you how to draw something a bit more complex like this sort of bangle holder that I've got here. And then I'll let you start your own. So this starts up here. It starts about halfway through box 1B. So there's box 1B, and I might just get a bit closer there. All right, and I've already started drawing it, but what I'm going to do is, rather than draw detail, I'm just going to draw this basic shape, and I'm going to worry about detail later. I just want to get the shapes in. So that's why I've actually started with something complicated, because I just want to show you that if you've got a complicated object to draw, just draw the outline. Don't worry about drawing every single detail. So you can see that it starts halfway through this box, right? 1B, box 1B, and it sort of falls on a slight diagonal through box 2B. So I've already done that slight diagonal there, and it just continues all the way to about this line here, which is line 3-4B. So just all the way, same angle, 3-4B. I'm not drawing every single bangle, I'll do that later. Okay, and then we're just going to draw the rest of it in, which is this here. So it sort of, there's a little thing here, and then the bangles actually go onto box C. Okay, so like that. I'll start it off, and actually it's, yeah, the bangles are kind of, they're going on a sort of an angle, but they're not all evenly lined up. So I'm just going to draw a rough guideline, that's all. And I'm going to worry about drawing those, you know, those bangles in later, because I don't want to sort of, I want to get all my basic shapes in. It's just so much easier, and then you can add detail later. So that's basically where the bangles are sitting. And yeah, the next thing I would do, and I probably won't put this on the video, but next thing I do is the perfume bottle. Okay, so look at the perfume bottle. It sits about a third of the way on line 3-4B. So a third of the way, perfume bottle starts here. So it starts about, actually, that's wrong, that should sit there, and my perfume bottle starts there. So you can see this is why it's important to draw really lightly. You will need an eraser. Okay, so you can rub out your mistakes. Don't draw too firmly. You can see, yeah, and that's where my perfume bottle's going to sit. This is where your sort of drawing skills come in handy now, those drawing skills that we worked on in term 2, you know, getting things making a sort of a rectangle look, or rather a rectangular prism look like a rectangular prism. It's basically a box, and so on and so forth. So draw, you know, the rough outlines of everything in your image, and then you can start putting a little bit of detail. But don't forget, you're going to be painting this, so detail is something that you can add after you've painted the sort of the undercoat. So don't worry too much about detail, just get your basic shapes in at this stage. And another thing I wanted to point out is, because I'm right-handed, I'm going from left to right because I don't want to smudge my drawing and make a really grubby sort of mess of my white canvas. So if you're left-handed, then you'd probably start from right to left. It's just a way of keeping your canvas a bit sort of fresh and clean. Okay, so I'm going to take you through key areas of my drawing. As you can see, I've drawn the lemon in here. I've roughly blocked in or drawn an outline of where my bangle holder and the bangles are going to sit. I didn't waste any time sort of drawing each individual bangle. I just want to block in where everything is going, just roughly. Okay, so I've just drawn an outline of that. I've drawn in the perfume bottle, just a few things that you need to be aware of. If you have a look at the perfume bottle, let's look at the angle, and you may not be able to realize it, but it's actually not exactly parallel to that frame. It's not sitting that way, it's just sitting on a very slight angle, really, really slight. So take note of things like that. Look at angles and see, you know, are they exactly parallel to the edge of the page, or are they on a slight angle? So that's a ever so slight angle, which I've had to redraw a couple of times. This part of the bottle is perpendicular, pretty much perpendicular. So you can see that I've actually not done that. So I'm going to correct that now and make that more perpendicular. So these are the sort of things you should be looking out for when you're putting your drawing down, looking at angles. And of course, looking at proportions, looking at how much of this box does this perfume bottle take. So it's not quite half, but it's not a third either. It's somewhere in between. So that would be the halfway point. So it's somewhere there. That's about a third. So it just sits there. So these are the sort of things, again, that you need to be aware of. The lid, you know, sits just about 2/3 of the way up. Yeah, my lid doesn't quite do that. So, you know, even I make mistakes there, but these are the sort of things, you know, you need to be aware of. Now, I'm just going to talk about this large brandy vase, I think they call them. Where does it sort of start? It's just below halfway CD line, just below halfway. So what you should probably do for something like that is just to draw a guideline. So, you know, just something like that to kind of, you know, guide you. And then perhaps look and see, where does it cut into the 2-3 line, this line here, 2-3C line. Sort of cuts about, I'd say, you know, about just over 1/4 of the way. So if that's half, that's 1/4, about here. That's where it cuts that line. So then I can just join the dots. It starts there. So just draw that in, okay? And then it just sort of skims past the lid and the edge of that. So, you know, then you sort of draw that in as well. So these are the things that, as a, you know, an artist would do when they're drawing. They're always checking proportions and angles, always. okay? And, you know, this is where knowing how to draw, for instance, ellipses helps, because you know how to draw an ellipse now. So when I'm ready to draw the ellipse here, I'll go back to what I learnt in term 2 and apply that. So yeah, that's where you go. And yeah, just before I finish that, I'm just going to see, yeah, that's about a quarter of the way up this line. So about here. So I'm gonna, you know, make it join up to there, somewhere there anyway. I'm trying my best to get it right. Okay, this is not intended to be an abstract painting. I'm trying to keep the drawing realistic. As for the way I paint it, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so in drawing something symmetrical like this brandy vase, a really good trick is to apply what we learnt earlier on and to basically draw a centre line, you know, the halfway centre line. I've already done that there and one there, and that kind of helps us see if our work is actually symmetrical. And I can already see that, you know, it's not perfectly symmetrical, it's getting there, but, you know, it's a little bit sort of out over here, so I need to have to, you know, adjust that. So there we go. I just need to bring that out and make it a bit more bulbous. So these kind of lines are designed to just help you get that symmetry right. Because if the symmetry isn't there, especially because this work is meant to look fairly realistic, it's going to look odd. So it's, you know, if you're doing something abstract, then you need to be entirely abstract. But if you're doing something realistic, you really need to try and get the drawing right. That's really important. And if you get your foundations right, then your painting will look better. Okay, you'll notice that, you know, your drawings, for instance, they all look great because you basically got the drawing right. I mean, that's probably also, it did help that we had an overhead projector, but we don't have that this time. So it's going to take a little bit longer, but it's really worth, you know, really getting that drawing down really well before you start painting. Okay, so I've drawn a line right down the middle of that vase and down the middle sort of horizontally and vertically. And I'm using that as a guideline. I've done it here as well. So I've got a vertical and a horizontal line. And now this is going to help me locate where the stem of the vase is going. So you can see that I'm using that as a guideline. So basically the stem of the vase is going to be equal on either side of that. And it just sits there like that. Okay, so you can see how just putting guidelines can really help you sort of get the drawing right. Over here, we see another ellipse. So again, you might want to draw sort of across to help you, which is how we learnt to draw ellipse in term 1, and use that as a guideline. Once I've drawn that stem in, I've just sort of curved the outline a bit just to make it look more like the vase. So I've got my guideline that eventually I'll rub that out. So that was the initial guideline there, a straight line going up and down. I'll rub that out. And of course the base of the stem will also be elliptical as well. Okay, I've decided to draw this wooden artist's model hand next, and the reason is because I think this is a little bit tricky, and once I get this hand in, which is quite easy because it sits exactly on this line and on this line here, I'll be able to position this one better. I'll know where it fits. So I'm going to do the hand next. And just looking at that hand, not only does it sit on these two lines, it actually, the wrist ends exactly halfway up this line. So I'm going to mark that in already. And that's kind of going to be a guide for me. And, you know, it makes it so much easier because that it just basically sits something like that. And then it goes from here, the wrist goes on an angle that way, so you can draw straight lines and then curve them later. Makes it a lot easier. The bottom of the of this sits right on this line, and it pretty much starts, I'd say, just under halfway. So if that's the halfway point there, it sort of starts there. And I'll just draw this as a straight line. You know, the angle is something like that. So I'll try and mimic that angle as a straight line. We can curve our lines later. Okay, and even this can be drawn as a straight line, and you can curve it later on. Makes it easier. So it's pretty much the halfway point of this line, which is here. So I can just, you can see I've already got that long. So, and then let's say somewhere here. Okay, and then, you know, later on I can just curve that, make it more rounded, like the model's hand. Okay, just looking at that thumb, it goes straight up and down. It's perpendicular, pretty much perpendicular, you know, to this line here. And it ends, let's have a look where it ends. It ends sort of, you know, before the ellipse of the vase starts. So somewhere here, I can estimate that to be somewhere there. I can even draw a line there to help me. And yeah, that's as far as my thumb will go. So yeah, just sketch that in lightly. Now, rather than draw every single finger, I'm just going to draw the group of fingers as one blocky shape. So I'm just going to draw this shape, okay? Makes it much easier. So you can see that it pretty much cuts the DE line about halfway, so here. And yeah, and then it kind of finishes about halfway. Actually, I might just, yeah, about there, which is kind of gives me room for the thumb. So I'm just going to draw a line. So this is how, when I'm drawing, this is what's going through my head. I'm not looking at fingers anymore. I'm just looking at broad shapes, and then I can worry about detail later because paint's going to cover all this anyway, so don't worry about too much about detail at this point. We just want the blocky shape, and there you go. So that's that shape that's going to fit my fingers. I might fix that up a little bit when I turn the video off, and I just have to add a couple of more fingers to that. And again, I can see that that finger and the knuckle of that thumb almost meet on the same plane. So that goes there, and then I'm going to add a finger up there. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need for the hand, all that I would need. I'm going to worry about the detail later. Just a few things to keep in mind. I've sort of fixed my drawing up a bit, and I used my understanding of a cone for the base of this hand. So I rounded that off just like you would a cone or a cylinder. This middle area here is like it's like a ring or a cylinder. Okay, and yeah. So, and I've just treated the hand as just a sort of a broad shape that I need to add detail onto later. Okay, so now I'm ready to add this hourglass, which is a bit trickier, but I've made it easier for myself because I've drawn the hand in, so I know that it has to fit. See, that part of the hourglass just has to fit snugly between the hand. It overlaps the vase, and it comes down to about, let's have a look, a third of the way in row 4 and halfway up row 3. So what I've done is on my drawing, I've just drawn some guidelines. I've drawn a line to indicate a third of the way up, okay, row 4, and a line to indicate about halfway up row 3. So there's my guidelines. I wrote this one out, that one was wrong. And I'm going to basically draw the hourglass in that area. To make it even easier for myself, and this is a tip that you can use, just draw a box, just draw a rectangular box that it's going to fit into. Okay, so just going to draw the box, and then I'm going to fit the hourglass inside that box. It just makes it a lot easier. So you can see that ends just before this line. So the box is somewhere here. I'm just drawing a box, and that's the box that my hourglass is going to fit in, because I think that's quite a tricky shape. And now I'm just going to think of it in terms of 2 ellipses and 2 cones and 2 cylinders. Okay, and then you've got these little bits there. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I've used that box as a guide to drawing the 2 ellipses. So those, the top and the bottom ellipse of my hourglass. And, you know, even though I can't see the whole ellipse, I've drawn the whole ellipse here because it's actually much easier to draw a whole ellipse, get the proportions and the angles right, and then rub out the bits that you don't need. Okay, so, you know, the next thing I'm going to do now is draw in that cone and the cylinder. And I'm probably going to indicate where each one starts. So I'd say it starts about halfway, which would be about here. So I'm just going to put that guideline in to help me. I've also drawn a center line to keep this hourglass symmetrical, and I'm going to start that funneling effect, that cone first. It goes right to the edge. Oh no, actually it doesn't go right to the edge, it just probably goes about this far up, and same with that, and then it goes straight up and down. Okay, and then I'm going to repeat that down the bottom. Okay, the exact same thing, and then I'm going to rub out all my guidelines and the bits that I don't actually need. So when I draw the bottom bit, I'm just going to keep that in line with that, and then go straight down. You know, make sure that's a straight line. And I'm going to draw in another elliptical shape, just here. And then I'm ready to rub out what I don't need. So obviously I'm not going to need, you know, that part of the ellipse. So it's going to start looking a little bit neater now. Okay. And so then all I have to do is draw that in, and that's just pretty much 2 straight lines. You know, don't be afraid to use a ruler, you know, anything that helps get your proportions right. So, you know, and notice how that sits sort of right, it butts up right against the glass bit. So I'm just going to draw a line there just to help me, because, you know, we just want to get the drawing right so we don't end up with a wonky drawing and then we're never going to be happy with the painting. So I think this one sits further out, and I can always adjust that. You're always going to make adjustments. Okay, all right, good. Okay, so I kind of added that 3D sort of part of the base and the top of the hourglass, as you can see. I rubbed some things out. I have got some things wrong. For instance, you know, the shape of this, the angle. So, you know, expect to do a lot of rubbing out. Just make sure you use a light pencil. Like if you have an HB, it's better. I've only got 2B. You definitely have a 2B, and you definitely need an eraser to do this. So keep going and take your time. Try and get that drawing perfect. Okay. I can already see that this and that proportion of that and that is really annoying me. I don't know, I think something's a bit off, so I'm going to have to rub that out. But that's all part and parcel of, you know, getting your drawing right. Okay, so now I'm ready to draw in this yo-yo. It's quite circular in shape. I don't really have anything on hand that is that exact size though to trace, so I'm going to attempt to draw it freehand. So I'm going to give you some little tricks on how to do that. Firstly, I'm going to put some guidelines to indicate where the yo-yo starts and ends on all sides really. So essentially I'm going to be drawing a box. So you can see it kind of starts, I'd say 1/5 the way on line DE, right? So I'd say somewhere here. I'm going to just draw a very light guideline here. It ends about 1/3 of the way on this sort of line or row 4. Just going to draw a line there. Okay, it kind of starts about here, right near that line, and it ends just over halfway on this line. Okay, so now I've drawn what is essentially a box. Should be pretty square actually, because circles fit inside squares. Yeah, and I'm going to just going to draw a circle in that. I'm not going to look at my drawing anymore. I'm just going to attempt to draw the circle using that as my guide. Yeah, already you can see that it's not a perfect circle, but I'm just going to try my best to get it right. Okay. Now, if you have a look at the yo-yo, there is a circle, but it's actually, it's not perfectly circular. It's actually quite an ellipse, because side on, a yo-yo actually isn't a sphere. It's kind of like a cone. So I've kind of got the beginnings of that anyway. So I'm going to use that as my guide to drawing a sort of a cone. So now you can see there's a circle. There's my perfectly round circle. I'm going to draw that, and then I'm going to draw the rest of the outer bit of the yo-yo as well. Okay, so I've drawn the rest of the yo-yo. You can see it's a circle, and then there's this kind of cylinder sort of shape behind it. I've just drawn in the basic parts of that. I'm not going to draw all the detail, because I can do that later. I'm going to be painting sort of my undercoat, and you know, I don't want to end up doing a lot of detail and then only to have to paint over the top. So just drawing your basic shapes. Next I'm going to just draw this line, and then I'll be ready to draw my licorice in. Okay, so I've drawn in the line, which was pretty easy to do, and now I'm going to use my box skills, box drawing or cube drawing skills to draw 3 little cubes, and then I'll put little sort of licorice lines through them. Okay, so the secret to drawing a cube is to keep your lines parallel. Okay, so I drew this line first, okay, then I drew this line, and this line here is going to be perpendicular. Okay, it's going to be straight up and down. Okay, so once I've got those lines in, my first 3 lines, I can then just add the other ones using that rule of keeping all my lines parallel. So that line is parallel to that. This line here is parallel to that. I need to draw a line that's parallel to that now. So this is just revision really. this line here is going to be parallel to that. And, you know, these licorice candies aren't exactly, you know, perfectly cube, but I can draw the sort of indentations and, you know, imperfections later. But that's kind of more or less the shape of my licorice, and I can sort of add little dents to it afterwards. Okay, so, you know, this is where the licorice would go. You know, like something like that. So remember, parallel lines, guys, when you're drawing these sort of shapes. Probably could be a bit longer. Okay, so in positioning my final piece of licorice, I'm going to look at this vase as a guideline. You can see that the edge of that kind of cuts through right in the middle of the stem of that vase. So I'm just going to draw a guideline all the way down to help me. Another thing that I forgot to mention is keep your pencil really sharp, because there's nothing more annoying than a really blunt pencil, especially when you're drawing detail. It can be quite annoying. So just, you know, take your time, start with a sharp pencil, and keep a sharpener at hand, because you will actually need it. Okay, so they're all the basic outlines of all the objects in my still life. The next thing I'm going to do is just put those bangles in. I'm just going to put guidelines for each of those bangles, and that's going to take me a little while to get right. So I'm going to do that very, very slowly and carefully, keeping in mind that bangles are essentially just cylinders with very rounded edges. So, you know, I'm basically converting shapes into very basic geometric or primitive shapes like cylinders, spheres, rectangular prisms, cones. Okay, all the shapes, three-dimensional shapes that we drew in term 2. Now, when drawing each of these bangles, I'm going to pay attention to the angle. So I'm going to draw the top line first, and then I'm going to keep the bottom line of the bangle parallel to the top so it doesn't look wonky. I'm also paying particular attention to the angle that each bangle falls on. They all fall on slightly different angles. So that one is kind of that angle. Okay, make a comparison of your angle compared to the closest grid line, which is always going to be perfectly horizontal and vertical. So use that. So that's actually going like that. So pay attention to these angles, and that will help you quite a lot. See that? So I've started drawing my bangles, and you can see how having that very sort of basic kind of cylinder or just a rectangle drawn first gives me something to actually put the bangles onto. It gives me a point of reference. So you can see how drawing the most basic sort of shapes is really important. And I actually had to imagine the shape of that cylinder underneath the bangles, but it's been really, really helpful in getting me to draw bangles that look like they are actually sitting on what is essentially a pole or a cylinder. Okay, so I've finally completed my drawing. I'm not going to put any more detail on that. I'm just going to look at it, maybe give myself a bit of a break, look at it in maybe an hour's time to check for anything that looks inconsistent or out of proportion. And then I will start tracing over my pencil lines with a very fine brush and burnt umber paint so that I don't lose any of the drawing as I'm painting. Okay, so I almost forgot to draw my horizon line, which is where the curtain or the drape meets the surface, the bench that I put all my objects on. So I'm going to draw that in next very carefully, and then I'll be done. So I've just drawn it in. It's really important that you think about the horizon line, or the line where the background meets the foreground, or the background rather meets the surface that your objects are sitting on. I purposely moved the drape around to make a shape, a curvy sort of shape. You might have a very straight edge shape. You may not be able to see your sort of horizon line at all, but it's really important that you do put that in so that your objects appear as if they are sitting on a surface. Great. So give it a go. Thank you.